Welcome back, WNST. Best laughs I've had in a long time on Monday. Got back from Green Bay early in the morning, flew back with Cal Ripken, ran into Dan Duquette, and, this video was circulating about the Georgia Dome implosion, and people were saying it's the funniest thing they've ever seen. And I thought, well, how funny can an implosion video of the Georgia Dome be? And then I put it on, and the first guy I thought of was this guy, and I'm glad I've got him booked on. I know he wanted to blow up the Georgia Dome at one point in his career as well, having been an employee of the Falcons, and one dome begats another dome. But Chris, that video was hilarious, dude, and I don't want to be a spoiler for anybody that hasn't seen it, but it sort of needs to be appreciated, and I don't know that it even is done justice on the news programs this week. You almost have to see it on your timeline to laugh at it. I found myself laughing so hard I cried.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the best laid plans of mice and men, and the Weather Channel had a really good look at the stadium, and unfortunately it was at a street that was not closed off to traffic as much of the downtown area around the dome was, and, well, as luck would have it, a MARTA bus, which is our local bus system here in the city of Atlanta, just pulled up right in front of the shot, and just as the building begins to implode, anybody who does video or videographers or photographers can understand how strange things can happen.
Well, we've all been somewhere where some yabo gets in our selfie now, right? I'm at the Eiffel Tower with my wife, and I can't keep the people out of the background. You know what I mean? It's just the world we live in with pictures, right?
Yeah, it just happened to be just a random bus. Actually, the best one that I saw was someone actually photoshopped the numbers on the bus to 028-3, which was the Super Bowl score with what the Falcons led in the Super Bowl before they lost, which I thought was a nice touch.
Well, I guess on to football here and the fun of implosions of domes. Lots of teams out there imploding right now, and other teams really that the Philadelphias, the Rams, the Vikings, the Saints. A month ago, I think you and I talked, and we were wondering if these teams were paper tigers, and they'll have their chance against the Redskins, they'll have their chance against the Cowboys. That's what we said about the Eagles. Well, they have, and they've held up, and the NFC is holding up. The AFC, meanwhile, is letting a team like the Ravens, sneak into the playoffs. And I have every reason to believe that 5-6 weeks from now, I'm going to be getting on a plane to Kansas City or Jacksonville or Nashville, and the Ravens are going to be playing a playoff game.
Well, it's amazing. Every year you look at the schedule at the start of the year, and you think you can predict the 6 playoff teams in each conference, or at least the majority of them. And, everybody knows that the Patriots are going to be in that mix. As a team year in and year out, that's going to be pretty good. We all thought, and we spent some time with Jack Del Rio at Super Bowl last year, we thought Oakland was going to be a team in the AFC that was going to be a major factor, and that hasn't turned out to be the case. I would have told you at New Orleans 0-2 start that I thought they were going to implode, and there was talk if this team didn't make the playoffs, there were going to be major changes in New Orleans. Well, now they've won 8 in a row, and so it's really strange, but it's par for the course for the NFL, what we've seen over the last 2 decades, where teams are not expected to do much, turn around and do it, and then you look at the AFC. You're right, the Ravens at 5-5, and you got a bunch of teams at 4-6 right behind them. It's mediocre, once you get to the wild card level, but no one's going to really care. This isn't college football where you've got to impress a committee or you've got to get style points. All it is you just win the games in front of you, beat the teams you're supposed to do, and you make the playoffs, and no one's going to care what your record is as long as you make the playoffs and give yourself an opportunity to play in the Super Bowl.
Well, certainly going up to Lambeau Field and packing a defense the way they did against a bad quarterback. And for the Ravens, Brett Hundley begets Tom Savage, begets Jacoby Brissett and Deshaun Kaiser. I mean, we're going to see, the real toilet of NFL quarterbacks here. And if, already lost to Mitch Trubisky, right? Already lost to Case Keenum, albeit on the road, and I'm blaming that on you because you left before the game started in Minnesota that day, Chris. But, down the rest of the way here, if the Ravens don't make the playoffs, it's going to be because they lost to Jacoby Brissett, or they lost to Deshaun Kaiser in Cleveland, or they stubbed their toe against Tom Savage at home against the Houston Texans on Monday night. I mean, this schedule could not have set up any better, and most years I sit around here and, much like Coach Billick, scream and cry, and the league's out to screw us, and how can you send us to New England in December, and all of that stuff. But we've played a lot of first and second place schedules around here over the course of time. This second half, especially the gift of no Aaron Rodgers over the weekend, it really does set up to, I don't want to say get the franchise off the hook, but if somehow they get into the playoffs and they go to Jacksonville and I'm sitting in the pool down there and they lose to a team that has 11 wins, I'll live with that. I think any fan would. If you happen to win that game or win in Nashville or win in Kansas City and have to go to Big Bad Pittsburgh or New England and you're still playing in the second week of January, I know Joe Flacco will get the arrow shot at him, but I would say it's been a pretty good season around here if they're still standing on January 4th, 5th, 6th that weekend and I got to get on a plane and go watch them play. And right now, if you gave me $1, I don't know what the Vegas odds are, Chris, but I would bet on the Ravens, not against them at this point, especially the way the defense is playing.
Well, the defense has played tremendously well. The one thing that I just, watching the game here in Atlanta on Sunday was that you get 3 early turnovers. I mean, the Packers are all but handing you the game, and the best you can do off of 3 turnovers is 3 points off. And in the NFL, when you get gifts like that, especially several gifts, you've got to take real advantage. And I think the final score is indicative of the way the entire day played out. But when you get opportunities like that early, you've got to cash in, and they weren't able to do it and didn't look good in trying to get those points. Offensive line struggled a little bit against the Packers, who kind of came after Flacco, and you get those down and distances or D&Ds that are like 314, 311, and it's going to be really hard to do anything with it. But Flacco gets a big touchdown right after halftime, and they basically cruise. But there are concerns, but if you look at every team in the AFC, with the exception of probably Pittsburgh and New England at this point, everybody has a concern and a reason to think, we may not be able to make it all the way to the Super Bowl. And, but somebody, a flawed team is going to find themselves in the AFC Championship game. It's just going to be a question of who that flawed team is.
Well, I think the Ravens are getting healthier. The veteran guys, the Macklins, the Wallaces, the Weddles, the Smiths, all feel like they're heading in the right direction. But until they sort out the offensive line, and look, the offensive line's an issue throughout the league, right? There aren't a whole lot of places where they're in love with their offensive line or where their 5 starters are the 5 starters they thought they were going to have back in April.
No, you look at Dallas. I mean, that's a great example. They were considered the best offensive line in football a year ago. Part of the Cowboys' problem is that in losing Ezekiel Elliott, they do have other running backs that can run the ball. They got away from it, which then forced their offensive line to really have to, stand up and keep Dak Prescott upright. They've had a hard time doing it in the last 2 games because the Falcons haven't been balanced. That's the one thing the Ravens have been able to do is they've been able to run the football to take some of the pressure off the offensive line where they're not under siege at all times because, Flacco's going to go back there and throw the ball 45 times. That's not the way this particular team is built, especially with the time Flacco missed in training camp. So your line's got to do its job in opening the holes for the running backs and protect the quarterback, but you've also, your scheme and your personnel also have to give them a bit of help.
He is Chris Pika. He is our old pal and my oldest pal in media. Met him at the News American back on January 20th, 1984. It's been a long, strange trip for Pike and I. You can find him out at Blog and Tackle. He is the communications director for the Bahamas Bowl, which means he gets a nice tan right around Christmas time, as well as the Pro Football Writers Association of America. And you can follow him out on Twitter at Blog and Tackle. This portion of our WNST programming brought to you by GNA Coney Island Hot Dogs in Highlandtown. Don't forget the French fries and the gravy there. If you're stopping in during your holiday shopping over on the east side of town, GNARestaurant.com. Tell Andy and the crew over there that we said hello and get it with chili and ketchup. Why not? Mix and match. We're also the voice of Coppin State basketball this offseason, or offseason, I should say, this winter season, fall headed into to winter. Juan Dixon will be joining us, as will Coach Burrows, the Lady Eagles, the Men's Eagles, playing the money games out on the road here this month. They'll be making their way back to West Baltimore. We'll have all the games on all winter long. You can learn more at CoppinStateSports.com. Chris Pika is our guest. Blog and Tackle out on the Twitter thing. Chris, anything you want to say about the war going on with Jerry Jones? And I know it started last week down there with Jones and Blank in the new facility before they imploded the old facility. And then we're seeing Jerry on TV this week, and Jerry's threatening all the owners. And the one thing that I find find fascinating is how much leaking is going on out of those closed owners' meetings. I've never seen open quotes freely distributed to the likes of Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham the way I have during this particular war. That does not portend well that the walls are talking all over Park Avenue and all over the league, quite frankly.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic. Jones and Snyder and some of the younger owners, and I say younger because Jones is definitely up in age, but he's not the family ownership that the league was basically founded on with the Maras and the Rooneys. That's sort of the old guard of the National Football League. Jerry was sort of the maverick who sued the league because he wanted, Pepsi to be the poor at the stadium where the league was with Coke. And he's always been sort of willing to be the contrarian against the establishment in league circles.
And he's had enough success that the minute Bisciotti walks in there 15 years ago, he listens to Jerry because Jerry has been right most of the time, right? Except on Jimmy Johnson, but other than that.
Right. So you've got owners that didn't get their teams through family connections. You had people that were businessmen, very incredibly successful businessmen, to get into that club, to get into the membership. So, and a lot of very good people and some not so good who wanted to have NFL teams that don't have them. But this group of owners, this group of 31 plus Green Bay, is, it's interesting to read and to watch. And Jones, this is a man who's now in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, who arguably had, the validation for everything he did the minute he walked into the Cowboys franchise after buying it and firing Tom Landry and getting rid of a lot of those old guard guys and then winning Super Bowls, but he hasn't won one in a while. And, this whole thing with Ezekiel Elliott apparently is what's driving a lot of this against Goodell, and the story seems to suggest, even though Jones has denied it publicly that this was about Elliott, it seems like that's what it is about. But the NFL has rules, and just because you have a gold jacket in the room does not mean you get to call the shots. Although Jones was a big part of two teams moving to LA, although not successfully so far as fan interest and sponsorship interest, and so. Maybe there's some folks in the league tired of Jerry's way of doing things, and they passed a resolution 32-0 to give the compensation committee that's chaired by Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, let them do their work in setting the compensation and the contract extension for Roger Goodell. And so Blank and the league have gone back to them and said, listen, you all voted at the last owners meeting that you're letting us do this and take care of it, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to go back on that. And Jerry's gonna keep fighting like a dog. He's going to keep biting at him. And when you threaten litigation against the other 31 in the room, or at least hint at it, that's not a good thing. That's not something the way the league is.
It's not hinting at it when you say you're going to have papers drawn up and you look across the room at your owners and say, I'm going to come at you with everything I've got, and you've got 20, 25, 30 years of relationship there, and billions of dollars made, on the sign above, which really leads me to wherever Goodell is or wherever the next guy is, right? I mean, look, you're an old line baseball guy, Chris. You tell me if baseball really improved after they threw Fay Vincent out. It did not, right? I mean, it was all about the owners. Selig came in, split it all up, threw out a real commissioner that was looking out for things. And at least I'll say this with Goodell. Sure, he works for the owners, and I know he's not popular amongst the fans or amongst the players, but I do think he has had a set of integrity and way about him that he has almost been more punitive toward Kraft and to Jerry Jones because of the perception of the other 30 constituencies in the league saying Jerry's going to get preferred treatment with his, girlfriend beater than I did with my team, or my deflate ball guy got 4 games. You better get 4 games. And I think there's a lot of pressure on Goodell. And look, I don't sit here and make excuses for him. I know him a little bit. He's been okay to me, but in no way for me to be personally defensible for or to put up a defense for him. But I think he's got an impossible job at any salary. At $50 million, $40 million, at 10 cents, at $1 billion, I think it's a very, very difficult job that he has, especially with the sort of the things built into the cake, like injuries and CTE and the Players Association and egos and television and new media and these stadiums that are built too big and too rich and the prices are too much and television's too easy and here comes gambling and here comes international football and whoa, we got somebody else arrested again and now Jerry's going to sue me. I don't know who could do that job, dude.
Well, there are a lot of things baked into it, and let's break it down to what that job really is. You are representing 32 billionaires and protecting their business interest and trying to grow that business. No different than any other CEO is doing of a major Fortune 500 corporation, albeit a lot more public than the ones there. You're paid to take the bullets for the 32 owners. Okay. Everything that happened in the last negotiations for the CBA with the Players Association, they're shooting at the commissioner. But ultimately, the decisions on how those negotiations are handled and what they give and what they don't give are really in the hands of the 32 owners. It's not in the hands of the commissioner. The commissioner is just a proxy for them. So they pay him to help grow their business. They pay him to take the bullets. And it's not popular when when you're going to suspend players like Tom Brady, like Ezekiel Elliott. The league's had its share of issues. I'm a personal opinion that there were a lot of longtime people in the league who worked for Rozelle, even for Tagliabue, who were shuttled out of the league in the last decade. Okay, who were really good league people who understood the issues, and you have people in place now in the league structure that didn't grow up with the league. They haven't seen the progression in the last few years. They're brought in to basically be fixers of problems for the league, but they haven't worked in the league for 20 years. They haven't grown up with it, haven't had those relationships, and that makes it very difficult, and the league has stubbed its toe in a bunch of things. They've stubbed their toe on domestic violence. Deflategate, probably went on too long, but and what's going on with Elliott's a different story too, but this was stuff that's in the CBA. This is stuff that the players agreed to, stuff that owners agreed to in the CBA. So this is where we are, and we're coming up on another negotiation in a couple of years that's going to be nasty again. I think you're going to, you may hear the word lockout. They're going to try to hold the line. The players are going to look at where the league is revenue-wise and think that they should get a larger piece of the pie. So we're going to go through this again, and the owners don't want to do this with another commissioner in place who hasn't been through this. And that's why I think this is the biggest reason why Roger Goodell is going to get that extension, and probably the biggest reason why once that extension is finished, the league media deals are set well into the next decade. At that point, I think Roger Goodell will walk away. What's going to be? But
what makes Jerry go away at this point, though? You're being predictive of Goodell. How much garbage is Jerry going to stir up here at this point? I guess that's the question. And what's the end game for him? To shave $10 million a year off Rodgers' salary? Okay, fine. But if the end game's if it's really nuclear war and you want him gone, I don't know how that ever gets. How you find peacetime with that moving forward, especially given the allies that Jones has, right?
Right, and so what's going to happen here is that the compensation committee is going to get the deal done with Goodell because they got a 32-0 vote in the room to go ahead and do that. Goodell's going to get his extension, whatever that winds up being, whether it's incentive-based or base salary and incentives and all the perks that go with it, and we can debate that going into the next year. And so he's going to be the commissioner. He's going to be the commissioner for the next 5 years beyond the end of the current contract, which is going to take him through the CBA. And there are going to be some tough decisions in the room that they're going to have to make over the next 5 years of him still being the commissioner, especially when it comes to the CBA. And at that point, Jerry Jones will fall in line, or as much as he will fall in line with his other owners, because it's going to be the fight against the players in the next contract negotiations. And so at that point, he'll fall in line just like Bob Kraft fell in line. But for him, for Jones to say what he said about Bob Kraft and then his fight on Deflategate, I that was very telling to me. And the other question too, the one thing thought was most interesting in the article. The infighting is fun to watch. It's billionaire on billionaire crime, as one person called it on Twitter. And that's really what it is. But it's fascinating to watch guys with tremendous egos in the room fighting. The interesting thing to me was that someone, a proxy of one of the owners, reached out to Adam Silver, of the NBA, to see if he was interested in the commissioner's job. And Silver turned them down flat, said, no, I'm fine at the NBA. I don't have an interest in this. And that what that tells me is that unlike the final years of the Rozelle administration, when Pete was sick and was getting out, dealing with cancer, they had Tagliabue in the wings to be the next commissioner. There were other people who wanted the job, but he was the guy. You had 2 or 3 candidates, including Shattuck in Baltimore when Goodell got the commissionership, but Roger was always the inside guy who had been through all that. If you look at the league structure right now, with very few exceptions, maybe Todd Lywicki is a name I'd heard, I don't know if they have the next guy in their building right now. Now, that may be by design by Goodell to make sure he doesn't have a rival that the owners could grab and say, you're going to be the guy and not Roger.
Well, there's so much institutional knowledge, right? I mean, and that's the unspoken part of this, right, Chris?
Yes, that's the point I'm trying to make. There's maybe Jeff Pash has probably got the most experience in their office among guys that are executive vice presidents, because remember, you've got to go in the room and you've got to find a way to make consensus with 32 billionaires. That's a skill, okay? That's a political skill to do, to get them all in the same boat and say, this is what we're going to do for the good of the league and for the good of our bottom lines. And there's not anybody in the league structure right now that I'd say he's the next commissioner. And so the league's going to have to probably go outside, which is going to be, interesting. You bring in somebody in who doesn't know these guys and suddenly has to deal with them and make deals and bring consensus. So the league is going to be at a crossroads at some point with the commissioner's position. It won't be now because that deal is going to get done, but after the next CBA, where the league goes from there, that's the real question.
Chris, always a pleasure to visit with you. We will continue this conversation throughout the holidays. Enjoy your turkey, your pumpkin pie, all that good stuff you'll be doing, as well as your college football here this weekend. We'll be following you out on Twitter, man. Thanks for coming on.
And just want to invite everybody to check out thebahamasbowl.com on Twitter. We'll have an announcement on our teams for our game coming up very soon in the next few days.
SPF 30 for you this year down there in the Bahamas, Chris. No burns, all right?
No doubt.
You got it, Chris Pika, our pal from Mount St. Joe and Loyola, now the communications director of the Bahamas Bowl, as well as the Pro Football Writers Association of America. You can find him out on Twitter at Blog and Tackle. Back, WNST, around here, Lambeau Field. I found out how good the media buffet was there. And, when the Ravens get into this sort of area where they can be a playoff team, I start to see the big shots come out. So we had a lot of those guys at Lambeau Field the other day. But no one bigger or better, a guy I love to have on the program more than this guy, who's very, very busy with his Sporting News NFL column, as well as doing the Sirius XM thing. And I did have Sirius XM on my ride from Milwaukee up to Green Bay. We welcome Alex Marvez back onto the program down there in South Florida, where I hope to find some sunshine at some point. Man, what's a Florida guy like you doing on a nasty day up in Green Bay like that, Marvez?
Nestor, it was great to see you, but it was only to see you. That's why.
Oh, you knew I was going to be there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a Ravens game. If it has anything to do with the Ravens, Nestor Aparicio is there. There's no question about that. And no, it was a Sirius XM NFL Radio tailgate show, and that's my show, 9 a.m. to noon every Sunday on Channel 88 on Sirius XM. And so they had a promotional thing up in Titletown. So I came, and then I stuck around, wrote about the game for SportingNews.com. And Nestor, you have done the Ravens ever since their inception, if I'm not mistaken. Nobody knows more about this team than you. You've written about it. I mean, I have not seen John Harbaugh that happy after a Ravens game, and my exposure to them more limited than yours, obviously. But this guy looked like he just ate an entire chocolate cake with a gallon of milk. He looked like he was so pleased with the way that his team responded, and I just think he likes this team, a lot. I think he likes the character that they've shown going through some real adversity here as far as the injuries go. I think he's happy with the leadership that he has with some of these veterans on the team, and I think he's loving these young players quickly starting to develop. I won't tell you that the Baltimore Ravens are a Super Bowl team. I'm not ready to make that type of a leap, but I tell you what, I can understand what John Harbaugh is thinking about here, why he's so pleased with what's going on, because, Nestor, we're seeing a team grow up before our very eyes, and one that may be very dangerous down the stretch here in the Super Bowl chase.
I love your headline, inching closer to AFC playoffs, proving they're not just mediocre. And, you pitch a shutout even against the likes of Brett Hundley on the road, third shutout this year, backup quarterback coming this week. We're still going to see Deshaun Kaiser and Jacoby Brissett. We're still going to make trips to Cleveland before it's all over with. There are going to be some more victories here. The question is, can they go into Kansas City? Can they go into Tennessee, Jacksonville, wherever they're going to have to go in January? If they get that far, can they win a game there? Can they win 2 games? Can they go and scare Pittsburgh or New England? I don't know, but I know the team I'm seeing playing this week is a far better team than the team that had Griff Whalen and Michael Campanaro and Chris Moore as the only wide receiving options 4 weeks ago.
Exactly. And that's so much of a big part of it is the health of this team. And now with Danny Woodhead back, he can be a real matchup nightmare, as we know. And I could see the Ravens using him in the slot a little bit to try to create some mismatches. Of course, the tight end position isn't what it was without Dennis Pitta. Max Williams keeps battling injuries. I mean, they just haven't gotten that production from the position like we've seen in the past. So I think Danny Woodhead could actually contribute there out of the slot along with Michael Campanaro, who did catch a couple passes the other day. But listen, when you have Macklin and you have Wallace, I mean, these guys can get open deep, and you could take advantage of it with Joe. But I thought what Flacco said after the game was interesting. Their attack against the Packers, and it's one that we may continue to see, that a little bit more conservative, just trying to get rid of the football quickly. Don't expose him to big hits. Don't strain an offensive line that has been battling injury issues all season. And, of course, we're all hoping Ronnie Stanley gets back on the field sooner than later because he is such a good left tackle. But I thought it was a smart game plan put in by Marty Mornhinweg. I think that Greg Roman's running attack, what he's brought to them as an assistant coach and the way that he coaches up the running game has been a really strong thing for this Ravens team as well. An incredible staff addition to be able to get him, and long ties to the Harbaugh family, as we know. And listen, I don't care who you're playing against. It could be Brett Hundley, it could be Brett Favre, whoever. You go out there and you pitch your third shutout of the season, and it's the third one for the Ravens since 2000. I mean, first time they've done it in 3-1 season since 2000, and that's impressive. And you could tell Terrell Suggs, P. Sizzle after the game was just talking about, hey, you know what? This was important. It's like you got the no-hitter going, right? You've won the game, but it's almost like, okay, it's the top of the ninth inning. You want to just seal the deal. Since you've gone this far, let's try to get it done. And it did mean something to this Ravens team to be able to shut them out. And, it's such a wide-open AFC playoff picture. I think we've seen that New England and Pittsburgh have differentiated themselves as the two best teams in this conference. We'll be able to get a good litmus test of where the Ravens really are coming up December 10th, night game against Pittsburgh, Sunday Night Football. I think that's where we can really tell in a couple weeks where the Ravens are at. Also, the schedule makers did them no favors, by the way. Short week coming up December 3rd. The Detroit Lions will have had that time off since the Thanksgiving Day game they're playing against the Minnesota Vikings. Then they get to play the Ravens with all that extra prep time, while Baltimore is a little bit shorthanded in that regard. Those 2 games, though, are big, but if the Ravens can also win out, beat the Browns, beat the Colts, beat the Bengals like they should, you're looking at least 9-7 for this team heading down the stretch, and possibly 10-6. Just take care of business against the Texans. And Nestor, you know what? The Ravens will take that, and who knows? Maybe that's even good enough to get a number 1 wild card seed and get a little bit more of a favorable matchup.
Always good to see this guy in Green Bay in his shorts and his sandals from South Florida. He is Alex Marvez, SiriusXM NFL radio host, as well as doing the column at Sporting News. You can follow him out on Twitter at Alex Marvez, and tens of thousands do. This WNST conversation brought to you by our friends at Box Hill Pizzeria. The best crab cakes in Arthur County can now be shipped even to South Florida. It's boxhillpizzeria.com, but don't believe a word of that. It is a crab cakeria, and of course you pick up that salad dressing for the holidays. I promise you great, great happiness upon your salads there. Also, King Discount Liquors, lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. I stocked up for my Thanksgiving with some Malbec last week. I gave the King a ring. You can get to Rosedale and do that. It's King Discount Liquors. Alex Marvez, our guest. Green Bay, after the game, Harbaugh's all smiles and stuff, and you're kind of shocked by that, I guess, to some degree, and I guess we would all be as well. And I do appreciate that I was the first guy to get the shout-out for making the trip to Green Bay in the postgamer. But I'll say this, Harbaugh's mellowed a little bit. I mean, it's been 10 years. He's got some pelts on the wall. If he were to separate from the franchise, he would have a job in about 30 seconds. I think everyone knows that. I know his agent was in the room as well from up in that part of the world, and the Harlan family and all that. I'll say this on John, if if this team 5 weeks from now, Alex, you got to get on a plane and come up to Jacksonville or meet us in Nashville or come out to Kansas City, and there's Joe Flacco quarterbacking a playoff game. There's John Harbaugh leading a playoff team. There's Terrell Suggs setting the edge and coming off the edge, going after Alex Smith or Blake Bortles or whatever. I don't know what else the franchise needs to prove at this point, especially given a really tumultuous offseason and a really, really tough summer all the way around with injuries and Yanda and Brandon Williams and Joe Flacco's back and all the other nonsense that's gone on here in the offseason, including a week of Colin Kaepernick, right?
Well, Colin Kaepernick, please. But I think that the point, I think that where you're, and by the way, I mean, what does that tell you when, listen, the Ravens, they didn't want to cause a quarterback controversy. And any team that signs Colin Kaepernick, it's not just signing him. People want to see him play, right? I mean, so
he would have made the Packers better Sunday, Alex. There's no doubt about that.
Well, yes and no, because, when we think about it, let's say you sign him as soon as Aaron Rodgers is hurt. And I'm not saying that he wouldn't have done better than Brett Hundley, because it's hard to get much worse right now because he's panicking in the pocket. He's not going through his reads. He doesn't step up. Instead, he tries to roll out, and it's just not working. He's not making impromptu plays a la Tim Tebow, for example. It just isn't panning out for him, and he's no Aaron Rodgers clearly either. But in the case of Kaepernick, if you're talking about signing him, this is not something that he's familiar with, this type of offense, and try to put him in to run this system right away. I don't know how much success he would have, but the point is, if you sign Colin Kaepernick, there's going to be pressure to play him. Anytime Joe Flacco, if he would have stubbed his toe in a game, it would have been put Colin in. And the Ravens don't need that. They are financially committed to Joe Flacco. The Harbaugh-Flacco relationship is so strong, you don't want to do anything to undermine that. Thus, I understand why they passed on signing Colin Kaepernick. But I think that what it speaks volumes, though, about the Ravens is that the bar they've set so high as a franchise that anything short of making a deep playoff run is considered a disappointment. I'm going to give you an example. The Rams this year, if they go one and done in the playoffs, it's still considered a successful year just because they made the postseason for the first time since '04. When it comes to the Ravens, you're thinking, okay, at least AFC Championship game, at least second round of the playoffs, and that's a credit to the culture that John Harbaugh has established during his decade with the Baltimore Ravens. So I can understand why fans got frustrated. And listen, it was a team, like you talked about, trying to find its way through the injuries that they suffered. And every team has to make adjustments as the year goes on, but I think they've successfully done that. And what I love about this team, too, right now, having some of these veteran guys. And listen, I give the Ravens front office some credit as well, because they underwent a couple rough years. And, of course, people will point to the Brashad Perriman situation and, criticize them. Matt Elam, there are some picks that didn't pan out the way that they liked, but you sort of make up for it in some ways, right? You look at the youth on this defense, how well they're playing. You hit a home run with Eric Weddle. You hit a home run with Tony Jefferson. You hit a home run with Brandon Carr. Marlon Humphreys is playing out of his mind. Number 99, the linebacker. He's doing a great job on the pass rush. You got Tim Wright. You got guys there that have really stepped up on that, and it has become a formidable defense. And I'm with you, Nestor. I don't think anybody, if you're a team, you'd rather play Jacksonville, you'd rather play Tennessee, you'd rather play those squads, even if they finish with better records and win a division. You'd rather play the Chiefs or, heaven forbid, the Chargers catch them, right, which is always a possibility. But you'd rather play them because I think they're a lot more vulnerable than a Ravens team that is going to be just down, dirty, and ugly, and it's going to be a gritty game that you got to play against a team that usually has success in their first playoff game.
He is Alex Marvez. You can follow him out on Twitter as well as on the Sirius XM radio thing and his column at Sporting News. He was in Green Bay and Lambeau with us in the shorts and the flip-flops that he has made so customary. All right, look, dude, I'll get back to football in a minute because I really do want to get your thoughts on the Goodell thing and all that stuff. But you're a wrestling guy, and I promised everybody a little woo before we got going here. You have not watched the 30-30. I watched the 30-30. Maybe I talked to Luke about it, but maybe it wasn't even on the radio. This may be the first radio conversation I've had about Ric Flair and what his life has entailed at this point, and the big expose that came out a couple of years ago. A lot of that sort of glossed over in the 30 for 30. But, I mean, you did hard time. Hard times, Alex Marvez. With Nate. None of this was shocking, but I guess in an era where, pulling your penis out on a plane and showing it to everyone is, maybe funny 15 years ago. Now it's costing careers, right?
Well, it is, and that was the interesting thing. David Vixpan wrote that at Deadspin, one of the few wrestling guys who I really respect, because he's not he's not worried about his press credential, or he's not worried about failure to get access to WWE performers. He actually writes about like the real legitimate aspects of the business, and it was pretty remarkable. How Ric Flair. There are certain guys, Nestor, in the media that get a pass. Charles Barkley can say some things that if another host said them, they'd be out of a job. But Charles Barkley gets a pass because they just consider him Charles Barkley. Ric Flair, you just consider him Ric Flair, and you're right. These things were either gloss over, or some of the issues that he's had, in terms of the lack of finances that have gone on for him. Terrible way he's managed his money because he's living life like Ric Flair, and so they focused on the family aspect of it. You mentioned that, and also some of the sexual escapades that Ric Flair has been involved in. They seem to be more glorified than they were condemned, and he has been hit with lawsuits on this sort of thing before. But again, everyone just likes they like the character of Ric Flair. There's something about him that just appeals, especially to young men. And it's amazing how it's also cross generations here. I was out with Rick the night before the Super Bowl, and we're talking about Todd Gurley's at our table. I'll do some shameless name dropping here.
Sure.
A guy from the Houston Rockets, who I can't remember, but he was there, and everybody in the club had to come by where we were sitting to shake the Nature Boy's hand, to tell him how much they loved him. He was so popular, among people, all races, all ages, everything. This is how it is with Nate, because those interviews were so amazing, and people get into his character, and that, in a lot of ways, was Ric Flair. And I think that Rick really is trying to change. His fiancée Wendy is such a wonderful person, and she's grounded in the real world. She's helped him get his finances in order. She looks after him. She's really been an incredible, second, his companion, so to speak. And I am hoping they get married sooner than later. Rick's going to their University of Georgia track meets where her kids, are in school. It's a neat deal for Rick at this point.
Well, he's never had a normal life, right? Literally.
No, he never has, but he's never tried either. There were always times promoters would ask him, "Hey, Rick, can you fill in? We really need you for a date." And that's why his first family, his son David, and there's another kid as well, another daughter, I believe they're resentful because they never got a dad. Whereas opposed to Rick, you look at what he did with Ashley, they call her Charlotte in WWE, and you look at what he did with Reed, his late son, and he was there for everything. It was a different time of his life. He wasn't traveling like that, and he really made it a point to try to be there. But at that time, it was hard for Ric Flair at that stage of his life to be a dad. He was really more of a friend than anything else. And he's a flawed individual. I think that's what the documentary showed. Nestor, part of the reason I didn't watch the documentary, a big part of it, two things. Number one, I'm not big on revisionist history, and I really feel so many of these things are revisionist history. WWE, they can't do that documentary if WWE is not providing footage, right?
Sure.
Essentially. So WWE has a hand in it. They're not going to do things that are detrimental to WWE in a lot of ways. So
it was a very sympathetic portrayal of him,
exactly.
with no, shamelessly so, right? It was there to set you up. You love Rick. Now let's cry about how Rick effed his life up and had a good time doing it. Kind of, sort of, right?
Exactly, right. So you look at that, and that's into it. And I'm also a person with a very short attention span, and I'm really busy. So I just do, I don't watch movies. The only movie I've seen this year is Zoolander 2 that was on TV.
That's one more than I've seen, by the way, this year. So
you see what I'm saying? We're both very busy. So it's just for me to invest 90 minutes in something is a lot of work, and it's got to be something new. I've seen it with Rick. I've known him through the years. My first interview was with him was in 1990 while I was still in college, and we've gone down that road ever since. And so I knew this stuff. He's a very complicated guy. He's my friend, but I also realize he's a very flawed human being as well. And I just hope, again, as life goes on for him, I just really hope that it has a happy ending, that he discovers who Richard Flair is rather than keeps living like Ric Flair.
Dude, when are you going to write a book with just wrestling story? Forget this NFL thing. The NFL's going away. You got to come back to wrestling, Marvez, here. Write about your stories. I'd love to read your behind the scenes with Marvez in the 90s.
It's interesting. I do have a pro wrestling training guide. I rode with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Harley Race and Les Thatcher and Old Salt, who's been around this business for a long time, back in the mid-2000s. And then the publishing company went under. It's actually a collector's item out there. It's got Nigel McGuinness now, WWE commentator, on the cover of it. But it's so funny because when I was doing pro wrestling all those years, I wrote it from 1989 all the way up to about 2012. It wasn't the type of area where you can. It was just more of a niche industry. And to be honest, the money's not there at that time. Now it's a bigger deal, but you're also dealing with just one wrestling company, right? And it's WWE. I love Ring of Honor stuff. I watch New Japan Pro Wrestling religiously. That's my bag. That's how I follow pro wrestling. But in this country, it's just become a lot lot different, and the journalism itself is a lot different as well. But, I'm happy focusing on what I can focus on, and that's football for right now. Maybe someday we'll do old school wrestling stories, but right now, mostly NFL.
Hey, man, last thing. Ravens going to make the playoffs?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I mean, I haven't found anybody that says no, and I guess it's because you've seen the Texans play without their quarterback. You've seen the Colts. You've seen the Browns. I mean, if you lose to these teams, I don't know how Harbaugh and Bisciotti are going to face the media, and I don't know how the players are going to face this if somehow they lose in Cleveland to cost themselves a chance to go to the playoffs.
But see, that's not this Ravens team. They don't lose to teams like that. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they have that issue where they get down. I don't see this Ravens team getting down. I just don't see them taking an opponent lightly and getting beat. That's not the DNA of this squad, at least from what I've been around and people I've talked to and seeing them in person and things like that. So that's why I think a lot of us are just so bullish on them, and it's a credit, to what they've built in Baltimore under John Harbaugh. That being said, listen, Nestor, if I talk to you next week and there's 4 guys get hurt against the Texans, well, I can't. Nothing I can say about that. That can obviously change the scope of a season. If any of us have to see Ryan Mallett doing anything other than taking a knee, you know that this team is screwed. But
or yelling at the officials to get a call, right?
Exactly. See what I'm saying? Exactly. So that's really what we have. I mean, look. So you never know in that regard. But I just think that this team now, especially, man, what a great signing Alex Collins was. My goodness, anyone in the NFL could have had this guy. They could have claimed him off waivers. He was even on another team's practice squad when signed away by Baltimore. Again, more great scouting by Ozzie and company. I tell you, man, I like this Ravens team. I think they're a neat story. Again, I don't think they have the juice to make a Super Bowl, but I think this is a fun season for the Ravens, one that's shown a lot of character, gets them back in the postseason for the first time in a couple years, and really lays a nice foundation for 2018 and beyond.
You are the only one that has called this a fun season for the Ravens. Trust me on that, Marvez. So for that, I will bid you adieu. Always appreciate your time. Love chatting with you, and hope that I see a little bit more of you during the playoff battles. We'll be following you out there on Twitter as well as at SiriusXM and Sporting News. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Nestor.